the divisions to get feedback from them, and are already thinking, and I'm going to be talking as I go through, flagging some of the changes that we came up with them. Because this is something where it has to make sense for you guys, right? Yeah, it has to make sense for you guys. So, what we're going to be doing is kind of just generally laying out first what the goal of a program like this would be, right? And in particular, what the goal would be for the W&SC and what are some of the constraints and what is the guidance that's in place. Then we'll talk about the program, go into the annual review, which is a very important part of the program, the performance measures, and then do a wrap-up. So if you think about the W&SC, right, you guys have a vision and a mission, right? You are committed to growth, committed to quality. You're here to transform the corporation into a potentially more efficient, customer-focused organization that provides quality service and enjoys a reputation for consistently high performance. And at the end of the day, kind of what you're trying to do is provide safe, potable, drinking water to the Bahamas. So you guys do something I think you guys do something very important as a corporation. You want to keep that in corporation. So I just wanted to recap that before we get into the program so we know what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. Now, one of the big things with this turnaround is really thinking about how do we make changes as a corporation? How do we define what we're doing and drive those changes? Because there's a lot of changes potentially proposed. So there's talk about bringing you guys under an economic regulator, so having IRCA regulate you guys, having environmental regulation, and these are going to be real changes in terms of how you operate, who's governing you, what they're asking you for. And when you're under that new framework, I think to a large extent you guys want to be ahead of that. You guys want to be shaping what you do. You guys want to be defining and making those changes for yourself rather than having someone impose them on you externally. And so one of the things for that is really thinking kind of how do we change what the W&SC is doing, and how do we look at everything that's happening and really put together a plan in order to turn around our performance. One of the big numbers that we were throwing around with the working group and earlier this week is just in the past 10 years, the W&SC has received $260+ million in subsidies for operating expenditures. You know, that's not even looking at the needed CapEx for the needed investment for capital expenditures. So you guys are asking for a lot of money for government. As you move under a new regulatory regime, one of the things you have to be aware of is just they're going to be asking why. They're going to be asking, how are you using this money? Are you operating efficiently? And you want to be able to say, you know, there are some things we do really well. There are some things we can do better, but here's our plan moving forward. So when we put together this action plan, there's a couple things, a couple big components. I want to show that this is not just, this employee effectiveness program is not just something that's isolated, but it's happening within a bigger set of reforms. So what you've done so far, you've developed an action plan, we've designed a new organizational structure that's under review. You guys are reducing non-revenue water with MIA, but there's still a couple other components that are going to be done. So reorganizing the W&SC, outsourcing a couple functions. I know you guys have been talking quite a bit about that lately. Developing and monitoring key performance measures. That's something that you guys are transitioning to. It's going to be really important for helping you guys monitor your performance and focus on your priority areas. And then the last one is, and this is where the employee effectiveness program comes in, monitoring or improving employee evaluations and also looking at career planning a bit more strategically. I think one of the big things with this, and that's important to flag, is right now you have a very big loan from the IDB. So you guys do have some of the financial resources that you need in order to make these changes. So if we have an action plan, like, why is the employee evaluation program one of the focuses? And I think ultimately, I'm going to give you a second to read the quote, but it's about kind of shaping company culture and thinking about how when you have employees that are happy, a company is just basically made up of employees, right? So if you're trying to turn around how the company is performing, part of that needs to be engaging with you, because you guys are the company. You guys run the company. You guys do the operations of the company. And so you want a program that enables and puts an emphasis on coaching, that puts an emphasis on employee development. You don't just want to have something where people get reviewed at the end of the year. That's a gotcha moment, right? So you have to think about helping individuals on staff achieve their potential, and then also thinking about culture, making, this is a different quote that I really like, but it's that phrase, 100% proud of the job that they're doing. Right? How do we make, because you guys, if you look back at the mission and vision, you guys are doing something very important in the Bahamas. You guys are providing safe, potable drinking water. You look at the outage with the transmission main last week, you look at what happened with benzene, like, this shows you the importance of the job that you're doing, right? And so it's something where you should be proud. And have a company and a culture that supports you guys being proud of the work that you're doing in the Bahamas. And how do we get that shift, right? How do we get people to feel valued? How do we get people to feel recognized? How do we really understand and reward people who are going above and beyond? So ultimately, you know, a good performance measurement program tries to take that vision for employees and creating that company, creating that motivation, creating that environment, and then also connect it back with the company's goals and having those two aligned. And a lot of that is through how you engage with employees. So kind of guidance, oversight, review of performance, and you have to have, in order to anchor that vision, and also very clear goals for the corporation. Now, thinking about the corporation, thinking about performance management, thinking about kind of the program you have in place, really the key guidelines. I know you have some draft guidelines for the evaluation process, but the big things that you have right now that are in place are the industrial agreements. So you have two of them. One is with the management union and one is with the non-management union. I think the management union, you guys are still negotiating. It's still, it's kind of outdated and it's going to be replaced. But the non-management union, if you start looking at their new industrial agreement, is already starting to reflect kind of this new vision for the program. So it's starting to, if you look at the first bullet, 28.2, it talks about switching to a single date for reviews instead of reviews on anniversaries. It talks about kind of changing the increment scale so that you can have an increment and a half, which is an opportunity to reward employees who fall between an increment and a double increment and who really are doing more than what everyone who's earning an increment is doing. And with the other clause, and I think this one is key, 28.08, you have a lot of conversations where they start talking about performance measurement scorecards, and that's something we'll hear about in a second. They also talk about these three goals in the bullet. So improving the performance of the corporation, ensuring that employees carry out their responsibilities and tasks, and identifying employees who are ready to assume more responsibility. So that's that much more broader vision of performance management, right? It's linking the corporation goals and the employees' goals, and also with that last bullet, thinking about career development. So they have an industrial agreement that already starts to reflect some of the key ideas of the program. And don't worry, I'll get into the program pretty shortly. I'll get into the program now. So I think, when you look at an employee when you look at a performance management program, when you look at evaluations, ultimately it's like, well, how did the employee do at the end of the year? But I think when you think about the underlying goals, there's a lot more things that they're trying to achieve. So if you look at that second list of bullets with me, I think this is key. So ensuring that employees know their responsibilities and tasks, and that's about having good communication, about sharing expectations, about being on the same page. Second one, improving job performance, attendance, productivity, and job satisfaction. So that's having people do a better job and having people be more satisfied. That's something that you want your performance employee evaluation program to do. Third, identifying employees who are ready to assume more responsibility, because a good performance management program isn't just looking at the past year to see if someone gets an increment, double increment, increment and a half. It's actually about, is this person doing really well? Is this someone who has potential? What kind of training do they need? And one of the big issues with the 10-point plan program right now is the evaluations are all over the place. So if you have people in different areas, you might have someone who's getting an 80 someone who's getting an 85 who's doing really well in their area, and someone in a different area who's getting an 85 and is very middle of the pack. And if you don't have that uniformity across the board, and you can't distinguish between those employees, the employees' records and past evaluations no longer serve as a really useful input when you're looking at promotions, when you're looking at openings. The next one is assisting managers in addressing performance and behavioral issues, helping employees identify and resolve concerns, creating an atmosphere that values employees as an asset to overall success. I think some of the changes in how the reviews are carried out are really going to help with that, and then improving the W&SC's overall performance. So we're going to get into this really quickly and then really go into it in depth, but this is focusing on the annual review process, and it's fairly intuitive. So you set the performance measures, you monitor employees' performance, you do an annual review, and then you reward them and give feedback. But specifically when you look at the review process, it's going to be much more much more formal, and also allow for opportunities for communication. So under the new program, and we'll get into this really soon, you have employees completing a self-assessment before their reviews. You have the evaluator gathering information, you have them filling out a score, you have them getting a check, getting that score reviewed by the department head, and also it should be up there, the division head, before meeting with the employee. And then the last one is a review at the end by HR and by the divisions, and that's kind of a quality control, a quality check, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But that's kind of the big picture. And I know right now it's not going to sound too different, because if you think about the key characteristics of the program we're proposing, there's a difference where you're going to be doing reviews annually, like at the same time. Okay, that's a small difference. You're going to have quarterly check-ins. Like, that is a difference to have that be more formal. Assessing employees against performance measures. That one, you guys have the 10-point plans, so it seems fairly similar. Assessing employees against behavior, that's actually a difference, but something you guys did in the past. Payments for employees who do well, you guys have an increment system, and then career coaching is part of the review. These things are all sound kind of on face very similar, because when we looked at the 10-point plan program, it's a fairly standard performance measurement evaluation program. But I think one of the big issues isn't the program in and of itself, but it's in those details of how things are done. And what we're going to do now is really talk about kind of problems that we heard with the 10-point plan. So in order to really think about what sort of performance measurement program we need, one of the things that we did is we went and talked to a bunch of people, right? We talked to our HR experts, we talked to kind of water utility experts, but then we talked to people at the W&SC to see what were the issues that were coming up, what things did they like, what things did they not like, how were their review processes, and we talked with people kind of at every level. So the division heads, department heads, kind of line staff, we met with the non-management union. So we really got a lot of input and a lot of feedback to understand how the current program is going, and as a result, kind of what sort of changes need to be made. So one of the big things that we heard is that there's a lot of inconsistency in the performance measures across the positions, and that not all performance measures are measurable. So I know with the 10-point plan program, you guys all had to come up with 10 points for your staff, right? And for some of you, when you have a position like a laborer, that's a stretch. Like, you know, you get 4 solid points, and then, you know. And the other issue is you have, when you talk about inconsistency, and this is something when we talk to employees, they were asking for fairness, or they're asking for transparency. But when you talk about inconsistency, there were clerks. There's clerks in NPO, there's clerks in Family Islands, there's clerks all over the corporation. And if you look at their different scorecards, their scorecards aren't the same, and not even like coming from that, they don't look similar at all. Where if you want employees, you have unions, you have people asking for fairness, like how does that look? And so that's a big issue, is some of these, and then kind of in addition to that is performance measures that are measurable, right? Because the whole idea with the 10-point plan is we're trying to remove the subjectivity, right? We're trying to make this fair by making this measurable. And in a couple instances, you have indicators that aren't designed well, where they can't be measured because of how they're written. So especially when you're trying to put a number on it, when you're trying to give them an 80 versus a 72, you know, like when you're trying to put a number on it, right, that's something that it can't get a number. So if it's, Greg, I'm gonna pick on you, clean shop daily, you know, that's how do you give that a score on a scale of 1 to 100? You know, and there's some that aren't measurable because to track them, the way that they're written, to track them, it would literally take the manager's time. Every single day you would be, instead of doing work, instead of seeing how the outputs were, you would just be tracking when people sent you reports and how many errors were in those reports, you know, and at that point, if you have to play, when you're giving your score, if you have to play it by field, the system loses its legitimacy. Right? Because if it's about being objective, if the whole goal is to be objective, like you don't have that. So that was one big issue. There's a couple changes. So one is kind of thinking more about smart performance measures, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and really applying that test systematically. A big change that we're thinking is not necessarily having 10 points for all employees, because some positions don't need to have 10 points. And then also I think an important change is weighting. So if you have performance measures, obviously some performance measures are more important, right? And you should be able to signal that, because one of the things that we heard from line staff is, if it's on my scorecard, that's how I know it's important. Like, how much better would it be if it's on my scorecard and it's worth, you know, a third of my score? Like, that's how I know it's important, versus, you know, something that really is worth 5% of your score. So it's something you got to do, but it's not your priority. And that's a way, when you think about communication and making sure employees know what's expected, what the priorities are, that's a big change. And then I think another big one is is separating, and I'm just working down the list, getting input from employees is part of the process for building these scorecards. Not necessarily getting their approval, but giving them the opportunity to help you come up with something that makes sense and give their perspective. And then the last one is separating, I know in the past you had a more behavioral scorecard, but separating that so that there is an opportunity to talk about an employee's behavior and give a score and have that be part of their evaluation, but have that be separate from the scorecard. Because one of the things now is with some scorecards, people are trying, for them behavior is so important that they're trying to incorporate it into the scorecard. And as a result, it loses its legitimacy. If it's supposed to be objective, but then you're incorporating behavioral subjective measures, like, let's just be honest about it. Like, attitude is important. How people do the job, not just what they do, but how they do it, how they show up, how they engage with the team. That's important. We should measure that, but we shouldn't try to force it into a tool that we're claiming is objective. So splitting out the evaluation into two key components, like an objective scorecard piece that's similar but very different if you don't have to fit 10 points in to the 10-point plan, and then having separately a behavioral piece where you can say, you know, this is how well my team member engages with how dependable they are, how well they work with me, with their team, with their coworkers, with the people they manage. So that's a big challenge, and some of the things we're talking about, we're proposing to change that. And just structurally for you guys as we're going through the presentation, I know you have it in front of you, so some of you might have skimmed ahead, but I'm really talking about, so we talked about like big picture. Now we're talking about what we heard about the 10-point plan, and then we're going to put the pieces and what we're thinking about changing, and then we're going to put the pieces all together so you can see that process. So it's not just kind of, here's a change here, here's a change here. But when we're talking, I first want to talk to you about what we heard and why we're making these changes. So thinking about in performance measures, one of the things is incentives pay. And when you think about performance measures, right now it's very, very hard to, and I know you guys know the difference for you personally between kind of like an 85 and a 95, or like even an 85 and an 87, or an 85 and a 90. But one of the issues is if you sit down and talk to your team member about that, like it doesn't mean the same thing to them. And also it doesn't mean the same thing across divisions. And that's a big challenge you're having right now, I know, with the new industrial agreement, is that communication piece with what do these percentages mean, because they're not easily understandable. So one of the big changes is thinking about a ranking system that is more intuitive. So if you have ranks that are more, you have quantitative standards that people are trying to meet, that you look at, but then to communicate with them using more qualitative descriptions. So being able to say you kind of meet expectations. You know, the expectations on the scorecard, you meet expectations. You're exceeding expectations. Like, you're like more than exceeding expectations, you're excellent. Or like you don't meet expectations. That's a conversation that for you as managers or someone having a review is much more understandable. So switching the performance measure, switching the ranking system into something that people can understand. And then one of the other big things is thinking about increments and thinking about, because right now, and I know it's different between the two unions, right? For you guys, there's a no increment, single increment, double increment, which in theory, when the 10-point plan program was proposed, was supposed to be incentives pay, right? So if you get an increment, it's because you did a good job. If you get a double increment, it's because you're amazing, but people are going to get no increments. But in practicality, if you look at the numbers, I think one of the things that I heard was that in the last 2,000 reviews, so 5 years roughly, there's been 4 people who've had increments withheld. and more colloquial, which means everyone's getting an increment. Some people are getting double increments, but more colloquially, one of the things I've heard is you basically have to work to not get an increment. In which case, it's not an incentive system, right? Like it's not. So one of the things that we're thinking about is how do you have more options? Because what that means is you have, you don't have 3 tools, you have 2 tools, and there's people, and I know it's really disheartening. This is something I've heard. I'm not a double increment. I accept that I'm not a double increment level, but I'm not a single increment level, because if I look over there, she shows up every day, on time, but I have to pick up half her work, and so how are you telling me that I'm getting the same increment? We're both getting increments. Okay, right, fine. I'm a 90, and she's a 75, but still, and so how do you have more nuance? And one of the things that's been proposed in the non-management union is thinking about, well, is there space for let's do an increment and a half. And I think one of the things we're thinking about now is this even an increment and a half, so you can recognize that person who's okay, I'm not a double increment, I know what that standard is, but I am not a 75. But one of the things that we're thinking about now is just with the way that increments are seen, if that's even the right tool. So it's something you guys have, it's something that's a part of your culture, but does it need to be, if you're thinking about incentives, does that work, or do we need to think about something different? The big challenge is, and I wish my job was like this, where I got an increase for inflation and then a 3% raise, 3 to 6% raise every year. So you don't want to add something on top of that. But if this isn't working, we're thinking now how do you complement that in a way that doesn't destroy the budget? Because you guys are getting $263 million. You got $263 million worth of subsidies in the last 10 years. So you want to be able to reward people who are doing well in a way that clicks with them, but at the same time, you don't want that number to blow up to 300 million. So that's thinking about incentives pay. I think there's still a little work that needs to be done. I know you guys know. The next big issue that we heard with the 10-point plan program is the evaluation process. So as we mentioned, there's not kind of a standard approach. And that's something, I heard 2 extremes on that. I heard on one hand, something very coaching oriented, very interactive, where I sit down, I have my employee fill out their scorecard, and then I sit down and read it, and then we meet and we talk about it, and kind of we get on the same page, and we talk really about their goals, and try to have this whole conversation. We use the annual review as a way to have a whole conversation. And then I've also heard, I've heard this from people, and I don't know if it's true or not, because when I mentioned it earlier this week, I got some pushback, but this is what someone said to me, face to face, is that when it's my anniversary, I get a nice present on my desk. It is my scorecard filled out, and I can choose to sign it or not sign it. Which, even if that's just the perception, if you think about motivating employees, especially if you have a more limited toolbox, that type of coaching conversation is really important. That meeting and discussing with them, understanding what they're trying to do, kind of what are the challenges they're facing, talking about their growth, that's a real, it's not a concrete, tangible reward, but that's something where you get people motivated. And it's an issue that at the corporation you have those extremes. And under the proposed plan, what we're trying to do is set up something more, one set up a policy that gets approved, but also set up a program that's going to lend itself towards that more coaching approach and getting employee feedback, getting buy-in. So, as listed, new ranking system, kind of better measures, talking in a quarterly basis, and then also just a standardized procedure. So this one, I actually think I caught it a little earlier, where I talked about switching to a more qualitative ranking system that'll facilitate a discussion. And it's hard to switch between qualitative and quantitative because you can't add up excellence, right? Excellent, meet expectation, you can't do the math with that. So there's a pretty simple way to work around that, and we'll walk you through that later in the presentation. But something more qualitative, and then also kind of some standardization, where if someone's scoring really highly, just an explanation. Because the big benefit of that is if you're thinking about career growth, if someone's doing really well, you probably want to say why they're doing really well. But then also that HR can help ensure that things are being done consistently, that it sounds like an excellent or an exceeds expectation. But not to change the score, right? Because we looked at that process initially, but really to think about management and where reviews or where managers doing reviews are going to need extra training. So, and then the last thing when we talk about formalizing evaluations is giving employees the opportunity to provide feedback that's documented, and kind of both at the beginning of the evaluation and at the end of the evaluation. What I really heard is, my manager gives me a score, and my options are to sign or not to sign. But that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be the conversation. Even if they are disagreeing, there should be an opportunity for them to document why they disagree and to feel like they're being heard. Because if you're trying to keep employees engaged, you might have a disagreement with them, but you want them to understand that their voice is coming through, that their file kind of reflects their opinion. So we'll talk about those specific forms a little bit later. So, talking about improving the evaluation process. So I think there's something where if an employee is scored as being kind of below meets expectations, there needs to be a procedure for how that's handled. Kind of how do you develop a performance improvement plan? There needs to be clear steps for how that's managed. And you should develop a plan to work with them, right? And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's also a lot of work to have someone on your team who's not pulling their weight, and the effect on morale for the rest of your team who is pulling their weight. Like, that's huge. Another big one, and I'll explain why we're proposing it, is that we think if an employee receives a rating of unacceptable for 2 years, there should be an opportunity for dismissal, which I know is very different from your policy. And I'll explain why kind of we as Castalia think this might be a good option. Because one of the things that we heard when we were talking to people is that, my area is not, one department's not doing well, and when I talk to the department head, the reason why is he says he has team members who aren't doing well. But when they get their scores, they're like scoring like 80s, and I was thinking about that, and it's like, why is this happening? It's because if you don't have a dismissal process, what happens if you score someone below a single increment level, right? It basically means nothing. It means you have a fight on your hands with the union, right? And it means also that if there's you have to work with this person for the next, and you're the W&SC, so you guys have a long tenure, the next 15 to 20 years, unless they get transferred or demand a transfer. Which, as a manager, there's absolutely no incentive. There's no reason why you would even think, you might bottom them out. You might bottom them out at the single increment scale. But like, why would you at all even think about giving someone a bad score, even if you absolutely know that they're not doing well, even if like their team absolutely knows that they're not doing well. And I think having that, I mean, 2 years is a long time. 2 years you can have 2 kids, right? Like, but like 2 years is a long time, and especially if you genuinely work with people and like are trying to help them get their performance better, you know, and they're not, after 2 years, they're still bottom of the barrel, you know, like, God. Training. And also complementing it with training, having these improvement plans. But like, if you don't have that tool where you're like, I'm going through a very tough time, like right with the union, with you, like this is a lot of work, but like where's the light at the end of the tunnel? And for me, for Castalia, when we were thinking about that, we thought that option should be there. And that's something, yeah, I know it's a big change for you guys, but that's something that we're proposing. And that's why. And then, talking about employee input. So I think a couple big things is, one, employees being able to provide input during their review process. I mentioned the signing, no signing really being what we heard is sometimes the extent of it. And then also just having a formal process for contestation. So if an employee gets a review that they don't like, how is that addressed? And having a procedure and having a policy that governs that, because sometimes what we hear is, you know, like the union will call up a manager, you know, and demand a meeting. Like that's not acceptable, you know. If you have a procedure at least that you guys can look at and say, like, I'm sorry, like here is how you can test it. You can test it through HR. Like, and I will sit at the table and meet with you, and I'll provide you with the documentation through HR, so we make sure that we do this right, so that this is done uniformly, so that this is done fairly. You know, that's something we think is really important. So, like I said, on face it looks different, but on face it looks similar, but it is different. So, okay. Sorry, just give me one quick second. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit because I covered these 2 slides, but they're in your email, so you all have them and you can read them in depth. We skip to slide, I'm skipping, for those of you following along, I'm skipping to slide 26. And now I'm trying to help you guys. I talked about changes, I talked about why, I want to talk to you about kind of what does this whole process look like when you put it together. So, skipping to slide 28 right now. So we talked briefly about this process, and now I'm going to go into it kind of step by step, because I think the big difference, one of the big differences is we talked to you about the big differences program-wide, and I want to talk to you about big differences kind of annual review evaluation-wide. So with each step of this annual review process, there's going to be forms that are attached to it. So when the employee does a or completes a self-assessment, they're going to be doing a pre-appraisal form. I know you guys have been working to roll out a pre-appraisal form, but why we think this is important is, one, kind of it gives the employee the opportunity. I guess we'll skip ahead to the slide. So it gives the employee the opportunity to kind of make the case for themselves and highlight anything that during the year that they're very proud of, and kind of give an overall view of how they did. And the reason why that's important for you guys as managers is, one, a year is a really long time and you're human. So if they did something really great at the beginning of the year, you're not going to necessarily remember that. And then 2, if there's a huge disconnect between what they're thinking and how they're thinking they did and how you think that they did, kind of either, especially if they think they did much better than you think they did, you want to be able to mentally prepare for that and to be able to know how to approach that and to be able to think. Because if you're just sitting there and all of a sudden they're reacting and you're reacting, you're not going to engage in the most constructive way. Versus if you're sitting there, you know where they're coming from, and then you can talk to them and explain to them, and you've thought it through and you have the documentation, like you're going to just be able to engage much better. And so this is an example of just questions from the form. So they're not scoring themselves on the scorecard. They're actually doing something more descriptive, which is also important for you to understand if there are challenges that they're facing. So I think the one about, are there any situations that negatively affected your performance during the past year that were out of your control? Do you have recommendations for addressing these situations and factors? That helps you really understand if things didn't go well, why they didn't go well, and be able to take that into account. So perfect example, if you're working in ops and a key piece of your equipment breaks and you don't get it replaced for 3 months, like that's going to affect your performance, and you want to flag that. So I think this form is filled out before the evaluation. It's filled out by the employee and given to their evaluator, their manager. The next step is kind of gathering information, and that's one of the big things we heard is that there's a bit of a challenge where you have your manager during your reviews, but sometimes an employee will work in different areas with different people. And so one of the big things is gathering the data to do the scorecards, but also going and talking to other managers that they've worked with, talking a bit to their team, kind of looking at their work products, so refreshing. This I think is fairly standard. The next one is the scorecard, and this is something that will be done by, and this isn't, I know it's not that small. So this is something that will be done by the manager, and this is one of the two, when you talk about the end of the overall evaluation the employee is going to get, this is one of the two key components that directly feed into calculating that. So this scorecard really looks at, looking at their performance measures, which you guys call now points, in the 10-point plan, like how did they perform, using that more qualitative description. So a manager would go ahead and fill that out before the review, and we'll walk you through that calculation process, because it's a little, once you see it, it's really straightforward, but just if I talk about it, it's going to be tricky, so we want to actually show it to you. Actually, and we'll go into this, and like I said, it's a little tricky if you just see it. I want to actually show you guys the math being done. So we'll do that a little bit later on. The other thing, and this is something directly addressing that behavioral piece, that capturing that attitude, capturing how people interact. I know you had one with interact, and that's something when I was talking to managers, they were saying, like, we used to have this was really important for us, and with the 10-point plan, it got stripped out. So this is something where you look at a form that basically says, like, is this a person that is good to work with? Kind of looking at different kind of behavioral areas and then ranking them overall based on those areas. So things like dependability, things like initiative, following instructions, working well with others, punctuality, attendance, and attitude, which some of them are, and some of them are subjective, right? Which if you rank someone poorly on this, you will need to have some sort of explanation, some sort of documentation. But this gives you an important piece that's not being measured. A couple changes that came up in our working group this week when people were reviewing materials more in depth with us. One is switching the rankings to actually matching with the rankings we had on the performance measurement scorecard, so meets expectations, exceeds expectations, excellent, doesn't, needs improvement, and unacceptable. So one, just having one ranking system instead of having two. And then another big one was something about preparedness and safety. So it's about, because I know in ops, in NPO specifically, one of the big issues is guys not coming with their safety gear on. So it's, when you come to the job, are you coming to the job ready? Like, do you have your boots on? Do you have your boots on? Do you have on your uniform? And being able to rank that. And I think it's something that beyond operations is still relevant, where if you have a staff member who comes to work, but they're, they don't have, they needed things that they don't have, like they don't needed to bring in not a computer. Your computer is on your desk. But there are other areas where you have stuff that you have to have in order to do your job. And Cyprian is not, oh, I know why he's nodding. Technology. But there are other positions, even when you're not in operations, when you're not talking about safety gear, where it's, are you prepared to work? And especially, are you prepared regarding safety? So incorporating that in is one of the big pieces of feedback that we got.
So Traci, would that take it out of the management scorecard, the measurement scorecard? Because, I mean, safety in certain areas is something that's very important, not only for the employee, but for the general public. So if we take that and stick that into the behavior, do we then lose the ability to measure on the scorecard? I understand the preparedness part, but the safety part.
Yeah. I would say, because the scorecard is how well, so I'll give you my answer. I'll give you my answer, and it's one that, like I said, this is a document that is evolving. This is a program that is evolving. This is something where we're trying to get feedback. But my answer is, the scorecard looks at things that directly, the scorecard helps the employee connect what they do with their department's goals, division's goals, the corporation's goals. So the things on the scorecard should directly be tied to key functions and how the work that they do contributes. So I would, kind of with that in mind, I would move safety to behavioral, but I would want to talk to you guys to see kind of where you fall in that, if it's something where what they do safety-wise, like the safety coordinator, like obviously, but like where it makes sense for that to fall. But I would lean towards moving it over to the behavioral scorecard rather than the performance measurement scorecard.
Yeah, and sorry, just one more point about the behavior that, like you say, we still developing it. But with safety, not looking at it as a line item. Mm-hmm. But if you have a function that you carry out, you have to carry it out safely. Sort of like preparing a report with minimal errors.
Oh.
So like, in terms of developing, an activity in the measurement scorecard, I would think safety would be a very important part to integrate because it affects directly, like attitude, has to do with the individual. It doesn't necessarily affect the organization. Mm-hmm. Safety affects the organization. So that's something to think.
Okay. I was kind of draw an example, maybe like when it comes to road crews. When it comes to road crews, part of their performance measurement should be how safely they set up the work site. Whether there's proper markings, signage, and that sort of thing. Like Glenn says, that'll affect not only the workers but the public. Okay. Someone can be driving along and not notice that could be a hazard. There's some aspects of that.
The question I have related to what Jim and Ox is, where do you put punctuality and attendance as a behavioral or performance?
It really. And so just before we move away from safety.
No, the reason why I asked that is I see the two. I see where I put punctuality and attendance, and I guess I somewhat see it with safety and better because you can come to wait, but if you come to wait, but you're not prepared to wait because you bring the safety gear. Yeah. It's the same, similar issue. I know it's going to be better as punctuality goes, but is it a performance issue or is it a behavioral issue?
Okay, so I will, touching back on safety and then going to your question. With safety, I think it sounds like there's two different kind of branches. One is safety in terms of like safety gear, protecting yourself, and one is about doing things safely. I think doing things safely, absolutely on the scorecard. Safety gear on the scorecard, let's talk about it. I'm leaning towards no, but let's talk about it. And then with Robert's question on attendance and punctuality, I mean, really, 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 that's a disciplinary measure. Like that's something that should be handled under disciplinary measure. But we like it under the behavioral scorecard because that's the question of, is this someone you want to work with? And that's part of it. Yeah, that's where I would go. But yeah, and I guess the other thing too is if you think about, we touched very early, a place that people are 100% proud to work. Some of that's how they're valued, but that's also culture. This scorecard gets at culture, right? This scorecard is something that will be company-wide. Will be company-wide, and is talking about we want people who are, we value dependability, people with initiative, people who work well with others. So that's some of that shift. But one big difference: scorecards, position-based. Behavioral forms, this is a company-wide type form. I know there was a question.
I just wanted to make a comment because this point about safety, I think the terminology is probably really crucial. And for the behavioral side, the way that it came through from people, particularly on the operation side, was, I think you almost want to call it safety consciousness. The way that a person approaches their work, as opposed to being reckless or not, focus on that, which is different from safety in the sense of how it impacts the public. It's just how I, as an individual, approach my work and recognize the importance of safety in what I do. And so that's the reason why I know when it was put forward, the persons who put it forward would probably be able to speak to it even better, but the idea there was looking at how someone approaches the same way that they work in a team, but it has to do with the safety conscious mentality of approaching their work. So in that sense, behavioral is why.
So you might have 3 safeties, which is good, right? This is where feedback is really important to do something. Yeah.
But now you see why, Traci, why this was we had such a good debate about this, because we, especially for operations, it is a critical issue for us.
Yeah.
Like I said, it costs the corporation a lot when we have safety issues. And Glenn, I like what Glenn said, because I'm looking in my mind now how a smart performance-based measure can be developed with regard to safety, which we didn't explore when we met. But as Glenn said it popped in my mind just how it can be done.
Okay. You have, and this is actually, it should be department and division head review. So I know that most of you guys currently do this. One of the things that we wanted, one of the reasons why is, as a manager, you're going to review your team consistently, especially if you're doing it at one point in time during the year. But then what you have when you have a department and division head review is that you have consistency throughout at least the department and the division. So you get, and consistency thinking like a 70, or not a 70, like an 85 is an 85 in our division. Like it means the same thing. It's not that like everyone's getting the same score or anything like that, but it's, if this department is giving an 85, like I want to make sure that that they mean the same thing when this department gives an 85. And having that higher level view and someone just being able to ask about that is important. I think procedurally, one of the things that's going to be important is really in the policy kind of explaining, just defining what the department head is looking for. So it's looking for making sure that the ranking system is applied in the same manner. It's looking for if there's a manager who's come to you all year saying like, this employee I'm struggling with them, and they're getting, you know, a 90, like just asking and seeing the documentation for that. But it, you know, so just really kind of laying that out specifically, what would that division and department head be checking for? And this, importantly, this is done before you meet with the employees. And the reason why, obviously, is the last thing you want is to tell your employee that they're getting a certain score, and then you have to go back and meet with them and change it, because that completely delegitimizes you in their eyes. Yeah, and it delegitimizes the evaluation process. Because one of the things is, if my direct, we heard is just, I want my manager to be evaluating me. And that was something we heard in a slightly different context, where it was, you have crews out there and they're like, you know, my field services leader works with me every day, like, but he doesn't evaluate me. Someone who interacts with me and just says hi once a day does. You know, so that was that context, but even then there's a desire for, you know, the reviews to come from a legitimate source, and kind of having it clearly laid out where those changes, what is the department division head looking for, not having the manager have to go change the score. And I think for managers too, just knowing like I should not talk to my employee, and having that in a procedure, like don't talk to your employee about the scores ahead of time, you know, that's just important. And even if they ask you, they're like, how am I doing? Like, can you, and you're like, and it's nice because a procedure, on one hand, it kind of means you have to do it XYZ way, but it also gives you a really, you can say and use the procedure to really help you. Say like, I'm really excited to talk to you, but, you know, look at the procedure. I can't chat with you until I talk to the department and division head. Here's what they're going to be looking at. You know, that's a powerful tool, and also a tool for it being, you being legitimate and you being able to say no sometimes, or say yes. The next one is, so we're getting to employee review process now. So you have the scorecards, you have the behavioral scorecards, and one of the big things with the review process, right, is not just an aha, gotcha moment, like really looking at the past year, but something where it's like, this should be a conversation. You're working with this person for 20 years. You know, hopefully not 20 years, but you're working with this person for a long time. Like, it should be a conversation about not just how you did during the past year, but a conversation about growth. And also, so one of the things that we're saying is, during the review process, you're going over the evaluation the past year, but you also want something looking forward. So how do we have this conversation, and how do we have this in a fairly, in one of the ways is using a form that talks about employee goals and development, and what they're interested in learning, where they're interested in going. That helps you understand them better, and also where this is really, really helpful, especially since as you guys transition to annual reviews, is that with training is going to get a stack of 400 forums for employees that talk about what are the trainings that they and their managers think that they need. So when training's trying to think about what to prioritize, what to focus on, they have real data, you know. But that's something, it helps you frame the conversation, it helps the W&SC do training better. It helps you understand what the employee is trying to do. So that's something that both the employee and the manager would be filling out during the review. And then the last one. So after the review, so you had your review, you filled out this form, and then it's that opportunity to give the employee a voice in a fair way. So there's a formal process for contesting reviews, right? And there's going to be a procedure governing that. It's going to be documented and through HR, right? And that's a procedure you can refer to. But in some instances, it's just good to say, like, how is the review being done and is it being carried out uniformly? And this is what this form does. And it gives the employee the opportunity to say, one, kind of we filled out the forms we were supposed to. And then two, just kind of voice their opinion on, like, were you recognized? Did you get good feedback? Do you think it was accurate and fair? Like, what can we do to improve the process? And that's useful, one, for HR, right? Because HR can see, like, is this process being applied consistently? And then two, it's good for the employee, because if the employee really disagrees, they have a form on their file where they can document this. So as when a promotion comes up and they submit themselves, and you're looking through, and HR is looking through their files, if there's a review where it's an off year, and then documented in their form, there's a score with a year where they got a bad review, but they're objecting, they can at least have the full picture of that. Am I missing anything? Nope. And this is something that the employee fills out after the review. The other thing that it does is it also, to be a good manager, it's about getting stuff done, right? Like, you guys have responsibilities, you guys have targets that you're held accountable for, but it's also about kind of developing your team and coaching your team and helping your team stay motivated and helping your team grow. And this is an input that helps provide your division and department head with information on how you're doing, in particular during the review process. So that's something where, if all your employees are saying, like, my accomplishments were not achieved, were not recognized during the year, that gives you and your division head feedback about how you're doing, because being a manager is really hard, and it's particularly hard because people don't tend frequently and constructively to kind of complain up the chain, right? If something isn't going well, like, you'll tell the people who work kind of below you, but it's not common, especially the higher up that you get, that you hear from the people that you work with about how you're doing. And this is a formal way to kind of document that and just give some feedback.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yep.
When you talked about the training needs,
Mm-hmm.
if I evaluate my staff, I which they need improvement, I recommend training. That cannot occur either because we can't afford it, or we have too many training things going on. Can they now use that and then evaluation is one of the things that hinder them from improving?
I think so, right? If you need training and you don't.
I'm just saying, because it could be, we could find ourselves in a position where the training needs, and we shouldn't be overwhelmed because the corporation is prepared to budget. And so then how do you handle that as an organization? If you're saying I need improvement, you can't afford training.
My first response was kind of off the cuff, but that's a bigger issue. That is a real issue, and that is something that we heard, which is, I need training and I don't have access to it. I'm not getting the opportunities to be trained. There are only a couple of people get trained in our area, and it's hard because there's a training budget, but then the question about how, at the end of the day, it will affect employees' performance if they don't get the training they need. But how do you avoid kind of really penalizing them? I think that's the real question. Is.
Yeah, two things mentioned is that, first of all, when we talk about training in terms of evaluation, we're talking about training that is specific to the job that the person is doing.
Absolutely, yes.
And that can enhance their performance, as opposed to general training where they say everyone should know Microsoft Word. Mm-hmm. They may use it once a year. So now we're talking about something that's specific in order to improve their performance.
Yes.
And I think the way the training form was set up, I don't know if you have it there, but it sort of generalizes, like it says computer, technical, and something else.
Yeah. Managerial.
So for instance, if you're doing something like GIS and you need to know the SB software, it's a no-brainer, so that's a priority. But if you're in GIS and you write a report, say once a year, and you want to learn MS Word, then you may be on the lower priority scale than somebody who is, maybe a clerk that has to do all the monthly reports or something like that. But I think it's all relative. Obviously, there will always be a training budget. There will always be limitations. You try to maximize what you can do in-house to reduce the expenses. But at the same time, you're talking about something to improve performance, work towards the goals and function of the corporation.
I guess when people are talking, can everybody hear the questions and hear the answers? I don't know how long this cord is, but I will try.
I'll show you.
I can speak loud enough. Traci, I had another question. You started to mention it earlier, but I don't know if I missed it or what. What did the working group agree to or suggest with respect to this question of the role of what we call the team leaders or the C?
In which case, you don't
That's
have...
me, I'm in eyebrows. That's the person.
You are Andros,
Yes.
W&SC. Okay. Yeah, that's a good challenge to flag. I mean, yeah, that's a good challenge to flag. I think with some islands where you have bigger crews, you can talk to supervisors, you can talk to peers, but for you guys, the behavioral form is going to be harder. And the review process is going to be harder. All right. Yep.
Question. We got about the safety, right? We talked about safety from the operations standpoint. Yeah, I mean, the grading system for safety from the operations standpoint would be different from the grading system for people who are not, let's say, the office area. In terms of how we approach job safety there. I mean, it should have more weight on the operations side, right? In terms of the percentage of grading.
Yes, I think some of the safety, so remember we've identified 3 safety areas. So like, one is like the safety gear one. That one's, and preparedness, that's going to be on the scorecard, that's going to be fairly uniform. If it's about how you do things following safety protocols, that's something that's probably going to be on your scorecard. Yeah. And it will have weight. That one's going to be on the scorecard versus like main office, they're not going to have an indicator about operating their computer safely. So it will show up more. And then there's like a safety awareness attitude one.
Yes, right. From the operational standpoint, if you know that, right, we are injuries or they have jobs, right? So that should have to be there.
And I'm gonna get into safety, not safety, but the weights.
Yeah, and that's something too with the weighting. So when you don't have to have 10 measures. All the measures aren't worth the same amount. So when safety is a priority, you can flag that, especially when it's safety about following procedures.
When you say flagging, does it carry a heavy percentage?
I think it should. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think it should be on your scorecard, and I think it should have a percentage.
Yeah, from an operational standpoint, because it's not just the safety of the individual itself, the person, because when it comes to oversight, it has to do with the safety of the public as well.
Just emphasizing safety.
No, I'm just saying that when it comes to safety from the operational standpoint, the safety that the employee takes for his work affects not only the employee himself, but the motoring public or pedestrians as well. So it should be weighted more.
Absolutely. And sorry guys, like I'm literally on a leash. I can go to like alright. You're out of my range. I'm sorry.
I think the use of the senior non-management staff to a manager in the performance evaluation process is a key tool that it has to have. it works, it assists my opinion now. It works in two ways. He's on site with them at all times, especially in operations. I'm not.
Yeah.
He hands his report to me. He then tells me the strengths and weaknesses of his crew.
Yeah.
I have to take his word for it. I have to rely on him because he's the most senior person in that crew. Also, when it comes to the union, well, he's one of them. Well, he's one of them.
Yes.
And if he is giving me this feedback
Yeah.
as to this person and that person, who's the strongest, who's the weakest, then you're being judged by yourself. So the union, they can pick up and fuss up and say what they want to say about it, right? But if you get the feedback from one of their own, that's helping you in the evaluation process. I mean, hey,
I think it's.
how can you lose?
I mean, you know what? It's funny because you guys are bringing it up as something you want, and when I talk to line staff, or at least the line staff I talk to, they talk to it about it as something that they want. It's just a matter of reconciling it with the industrial agreement.
The reason why I brought it up, right, is because when I came here some time back, that's just the way it was done. I mean, can you say it's now old-fashioned and outdated? Still, it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
It makes a hell of a lot of sense. My foreman, and my senior foreman, my supervisor, my superintendent will always meet with them. To have some rough idea of what's going on with me and my other colleagues. And then the supervisor, he'll also, of course, inject his own opinion into it, because his opinion supersedes everything.
Yeah.
But you're going to need your senior non-management staff to assist you in the evaluation process. I must say, to evaluate you, to evaluate the staff, but he knows what's going on better than you. And you have to trust him.
I am with you guys. If you guys want it, they want it. Like, you don't, I am with you. It makes sense to me. One thing is, you guys, the industrial agreements are legally binding documents, and you guys, they are real constraints on how you guys operate. So it's a question of seeing how to make that work within these documents. So I think that's something we'll flag, and just in particular seeing how do you make this work in a way where the W&SC is not going to get opened up to a lot of problems, or how do you make this work in a way that the unions are happy with, we're on the same page. All right, guys, I'm gonna keep, unless there's anything urgent, I'm gonna keep moving, because we haven't done some of the math, which I think is fun. Great. So yeah, and then the other piece, and I talked about this briefly, there's how do you incentivize staff with more than just money, but through coaching, through helping them see career path, through helping them feel valuable. But then there's a question of how do you actually tie this to money, more than just no increment, single increment, double increment. But that's something we're thinking about right now, There is one change though with the non-management union, so there's now an increment and half with them. So now, Patricia, so I talked to you about the scorecards, I talked to you about the qualitative way of ranking against measures, performance measures, and we're just going to show you in like how does this work, because I think this helps you really understand what the process looks like. So Patricia is going to walk you. Do you guys want a short break to go? Yeah. Oh, okay.
I work with Traci and Morgan at Castalia. I'm originally from San Juan, Puerto Rico, so I'm very happy to be back in the Caribbean from snowy Washington. I have the opposite problem as Traci. I tend to talk really, really loud, so I might need to hold the microphone like that. So let me know if I'm getting too loud. So today I'm going to be speaking with you about the logistics of the performance management scorecard. The print is very, very small, so I'm going to walk you through it. And the order of the columns might change as we make changes to make it more intuitive for both the managers and the employees. But first, in the first column, you have the aspect of the performance measured, and you get that from the job description, which we talked a lot about in our working group, and which we think that job descriptions should be developed, standardized, compiled, and then distributed to managers by HR. The second column is the measurement criteria. And the measurement criteria are a set of indicators that measure the aspect of performance. The third column is the type of indicator, so that indicates whether the indicator is process-based, an outcome, or personal development. And each type of employee has a different mix of those three types of indicators. The target sets the measurement criteria. In other words, it sets the standard to which the employee must meet that indicator in order to either meet expectations. Then we have the rank, and this is what I'm going to really focus on today. There in the performance scorecard, there are 5 ranks. The first rank is unsatisfactory. The second rank is unacceptable. The second rank is needs improvement. And we phrase it that way purposefully because we want the scorecard to be focused towards growth. The third one is meets expectations. The fourth is exceeds expectations, and the fifth one is excellent for that truly outstanding employee. So next. Each one of those levels receives a point. It's rated on a scale. Unacceptable is 1 point. Needs improvement is 2 points. Meets expectations is 3 points. Exceeds expectation is 4 points, and excellent is 5 points. So as you rank how that employee did, if that employee met the target or didn't meet the target or exceeded the target, and to what degree did that employee exceeded the target, you're gonna put that rank on that rank column. And if it's helpful for you, write down the number that rank corresponds to. Next. So this is where we get in, Traci said that we get into the math. Each indicator is weighted, and it's weighted based on 2 things, and we're still figuring out what the balance should be. But it's weighted on the core functions of the employee's job. So if an employee is an accountant, accounting should, an indicator that indicates accounting is going to be a major function. It's going to be very highly weighted. And you're going to multiply that weight times the rank. So in that first row, the employee exceeded expectations for that indicator, so that awarded him what number?
1 point.
4, because it's going up. Exceeded expectations is 4. So you multiply that 4 times the weight of the indicator, which is 25%. 4 times 0.25 is what? 1. So you put the 1 in the points. We're going to try it again with row 2 to see if you get it with me. So meet expectations gets what number? 3. Meet expectations gets 3. And the weight of the indicator is 15%. What would you multiply that 3 against? 0.15, that's right, which gets you the total points of 0.45. Okay? So you multiply against the weight to get the points. And again, we're thinking of moving, this is some feedback that we got from our working group, we're thinking of moving that final weight column to be next to the rank so that it flows like a multiplication table. Then, after you finish multiplying the value of each indicator by its weight, you calculate the score moving down, and you add up all of the points. You get to that final 3.4, and this is the total score for the performance scorecard. Now we're thinking, this is something that we're still thinking about, is how to blend that score with the result from the behavior scorecard. There are a couple of options that we're throwing around during our working group meeting, whether the behavior scorecard should serve as a multiplier or whether it should be added to it, and we're still toying around with the idea so that so the total number that ends in the average weighted score is the best representation of what that employee has contributed to your team. In this case, it's 3.4. You add the point values together, and then then you convert the score back into a qualitative ranking. So in this case, it's a 3.4, and you can either round down or round up, depending on, and this is getting back to basic arithmetic that we learn in elementary school, it's all coming back. So 3.4, you round down to what? 3. And what does 3 equal? So if the average weighted score was 4.8, what would it be? 5? 4.8, you round to 5, which is? Excellent, correct. Okay, like I said, we're thinking of how to go about blending that final weighted final score with the behavior, the final score from the behavior, because really the employee should see one score. Now back to Tracy. Oh, question, yes. It's going to depend on the job description of that employee. And it's also going to depend on how those performance, what the performance scorecard, how that specific function ties to the overall objectives of the corporation. Like we've said, we're trying to make sure that employees know that they're part of a greater group, and we're trying to change culture. So we're trying to tie the smallest contribution of each employee and how that ties back to the mission of the W&SC. Anything to add, Tracy?
In terms of weighting, that was something, just to add on to what Patricia said, right? Weighting is important for signaling to the employees what their most important responsibilities are, right? Because what their most important responsibilities are. One of the big questions in our working group is, how is weighting defined? Because that's a question of, to some degree, fairness, and also if you want to have some degree of standardization, there should be some sort of procedure. In general, for weighting, there are 2 guidelines. 2 guidelines right now, with the understanding that we'll need to build something out more. One is that the total weight should be 100%, and that in general, you should do 5% increments to make it more straightforward. One of the big things with the employees is that this weight will be determined when their scorecard is built, right? So they will know. It's not that at the end of the year you're saying, okay, well, this weight is now weighted 25%, this is now weighted 30%. It's clear from the get-go, right? But what we do need to do on our end, and this is a big piece of feedback that we got, is there needs to be a procedure so that its weighting is approached in a kind of a standardized way throughout the corporation. There were some suggestions about, I think what we're leaning towards, without having really had time to build something, draft out and circulate it, is really being able to think in a systematic way about the importance of functions. So having, when you're building a scorecard, if it's, you rank the functions and the measures, is this measure like a high importance measure, is it a low importance measure, is it a medium importance measure, and just some guidance in saying if it's a high importance measure, which means, you know, it's essential to the employee's job, it directly affects, you know, and with some definition of that, that should fall within this range. Because it's something like that, especially for the managers, is as we're building them and ensuring standardization, that even that level of guidance will help. Does that answer your question? Or did you have any kind of follow-on objections or questions or suggestions? I mean, it's something we need to work on that we got asked about in the working group. Yeah, if you have suggestions about kind of thinking about weighting in a strategic way, like, let's talk about them. Because like I said, this is something that we're putting out there because we want feedback, right? Because we're trying to make this better. We're trying to make the forms more usable. We're trying to address real issues that you guys have in the field, like safety. And if things don't make sense, if things are big places where there's going to be a lack of standardization, let's talk about them and put in a procedure. All right, so I see a lot of small conversations happening, and really if you have a question, I probably won't be able to bring the mic to you, but other people probably have that question. And this is a good point, especially as we're between sections, to bring it up, and I'm happy to answer it. Anyone have anything that they want to ask about? Or any concerns that they want to mention, because that's a big part of it. One thing, just a heads up, guys. So one of the things, like I said, this is about getting feedback and making sure that this makes sense for you guys. We're going to be sending out a survey where you guys can kind of anonymous, and asking you guys to kind of answer some questions just in terms of what you think about it, concerns you have, offer recommendations. So, and you guys can all respond anonymously. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple days, because that'll give you an opportunity. I know some of you might not want to ask questions right here in front of everyone, but that's an opportunity to really bring up points that, you know, when you heard it, it just, you know, it will not fly in your area, or where you think like, this is fantastic, please make sure this is in. Or you mentioned a policy or procedure for figuring out weighting so it's standardized, like absolutely you need this. Yep.
My thoughts on the weight indicator. The department head and the division head knows how he wants his department or division run. If he determines the weight indicator for the individuals in his department and or his division, then we get some guidance.
Yeah,
Isn't that
I think you might want, so the statement was, you know, the department and division head are responsible and they really know what they want prioritized.
Exactly.
I think that just in terms of fairness and transparency, it might be good to have a little more guidance, but obviously, I mean, the department and division heads are responsible for KPIs, for hitting certain targets. You know,
I can make suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
I can have an input, but it is his division. It is his or her department. It's only so much of you know, so much input that I can do. I'm sure that the division head or the department head, he knows exactly what his targets and he would like for his department or his or her division. Sorry for sounding so,
No.
saying his all the time. I'm a little ancient, from his or her department.
There you go.
And I know and just comply with it. He knows, I mean, he or she knows what they want, what their expectations are, because they themselves have their goals and the duties of me as the managers to help them meet theirs.
Yeah, I see a couple hands poking up, but
Just to expand on that, it is important for us to realize or we remember that when we build these performance employee performance cards, scorecards, this is something that's going to be done not only across the board, but long before the evaluation process itself.
Yes.
So these things shouldn't be arbitrarily changed.
yes,
It's
absolutely.
going to be and this is what Ingrid and Tabitha, there's going to be a process. We're hopefully seeking to develop a process by which we will determine the weighting of these performance measures. So once we would have gone through that process and determined that repairing a leak is 15% of that position's job or that function, then that is what it is. Now, we may say scorecards will be reviewed every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and at that point in time, you look at your past history and say, we need to make this bigger or smaller, whatever. But when we build those scorecards for everybody in the department, division, corporation, follow that and it's set. So it can't be arbitrary change.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about one of the big things with this program is communicating with employees about what you're expecting from them. You know, like the last thing you want is for them to have for them to not see their scorecard until their review. Right? Then you lose that goal entirely, right? And that's a recipe for disaster. And you also don't want to be changing things. You know, if they say this year, I know my scorecard, this is how I need to focus, and they sit down for their review and it's different, like, no. So it's something, it will be established. The division and department heads should have a lot of input because they're going to be responsible, but there should also be some sort of guidance so that it's fairly applied throughout the corporation. And transparent for employees, right? Because if the employee wants to know why is this weighted, you know, this used to be one of my points, like why is this now worth 50%? Like you have to be able to explain that, you know? And you need to have that, it's about that, having that consistency in the corporation, and then also being able to refer to documents so that it's a more fair procedure. Where you say, this is how the corporation is doing it. I'm not making these decisions right now, ad hoc, kind of at will. Like, there is a policy that governs this. We do things similarly here. We do things this way, and something that they can understand. All right. Okay. So, one of the big changes, we were talking about the performance measures. So what you guys currently call the points on the 10-point plans. And we mentioned a couple issues where, you know, they're not SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And that, since that forms the foundation of your evaluation system and of this new evaluation system, we want to talk to you a little bit about some of the differences you should see, and we're going to be working with you guys on in order to get better indicators. Because that was something, you know, if it's too cumbersome, you're never going to track it, you know, and then you're doing it off the cuff at the end of the year, and that's not fair. Or if it's not time-bound, or there's not specifications on quality, then people, you know, it's just a description of what they do, not a measure of how well they're doing something. So I want to focus on the performance measures. I think we have actually 2 slides that are very similar. So when you think about, Yeah, when you think about effective, and you have the slide deck, we have 2 slides that are very similar. Sorry about that. But when you think about them, it makes it easy for the manager to monitor the employee's performance and assess how well he or she carries out her responsibilities. Specifically, when you have a good measure, it should hit kind of these specific criteria. So 1, kind of how well they carry out their responsibilities. 2, alignment with the W&SC's goals. So you don't want an employee focusing on something that ultimately isn't going to help the corporation or really help the corporation. You know, that's just noise, that's just a distraction from what's really important. 2, be appropriate for the employee's level of authority and responsibility, because it's not fair if you're asking them to hit targets that they don't have the resources, they don't have kind of the authority to be able to control. 4, be smart. So we keep hammering this home, but I think this is something, even when we were with our working group, as they look through 10-point plans we have right now, we were able to say, you take this indicator and you tweak it, and it makes a huge difference in terms of expectations. So again, you know, smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. And then the last one is just really clearly showing the employee what the W&SC is expecting from them. So here's, for those of you who have the slides in front of you, this is a little bit easier because you'll have it in bigger print. But this is just an example of differences between kind of indicators that meet that criteria and indicators that don't. So if you look at this table, the characteristic in the indicator in the column, the 5th column, performance measure that does not have this characteristic doesn't hit those criteria. And then there's a change in the 4th column that talks about how it can be changed so that it hits those criteria we just mentioned.
Whoa, yeah, cool.
Making sure we can read it in the back row. So for example, the first one, and so let's see what the position is. So this is for an electrician too. And this is something where this example, there's 3 examples, but this example highlights the difference between something that is appropriate for the employee's level of responsibility. Remember, we have that list of 5 things. So if you scroll over, the performance measure that does not have this characteristic. And one of the big things we found in our working group, as a kind of a preface, is that performance measures up here are not perfect. And that what we found is working as a group, we really got much better measures. One, because you had multiple eyes checking it. It allowed for kind of consistency within the group. And then also people catch things or know certain aspects of the job better. So that's something, as we're developing performance measures, one of the big things we're going to be recommending is coming at it with a group approach. So not just, originally we're thinking, the manager will sit down and kind of draft something and get it cleared. But one of the big pieces of feedback and things that we felt and experienced firsthand is when you have a group together, you end up with something much better. That said, so say they have a performance measure that says the number of workplace safety violations for the department for the year to date. That one is just not appropriate. Like the electrician cannot control what the department is doing versus something that's the number of violations for that individual. And the nice thing about that is it is specific, it is measurable, relevant, achievable, and time-bound, because you have that to date and at the right level. Because you can't ask an electrician to make sure that there are no violations in the department. Yep.
Who is determining the violations at this point?
what is the procedure for safety violations?
I may come as a safety coordinator, I may come across a violation, but it may be weeks or months after it's been committed. I may not be able to determine who the individual is, I can only put it to the department.
Okay. I mean, it's something, I mean, I know this is a heated point for you guys, but it's a question of who should be checking for safety violations, because that'll help kind of frame your question a bit, which is it's not just safety, right? Managers need to be responsible because managers are with their team every day. So those kind of violations need to be documented and cataloged, in which case something like this makes a little more sense.
Well, I guess the same way we could be asking the team leaders to come in and give input on people who work on the weekend. I guess the team leaders should have some responsibility for the violations, safety violations also.
Yeah. I mean, safety is very important, you know, and you guys want to be reinforcing that. We're trying, yeah.
It should be the eyes and the hands on the first violation.
Yeah, because what I found in the past, I may open a cabinet door and I find that the distribution panel covers all sitting on the ground. Somebody has worked on that panel but just didn't put the door lock. All right, that is a clear violation.
Yeah, so your question, I don't 100% have the answer for it, is sometimes there are violations that cannot be pinned to an individual. And how is that handled under this indicator?
Well, I can give the department a citation, but it still may not ever get back to that individual. They may not fess up that, they have to.
Yeah, but just to emphasize, the focus is that whatever you put on the performance measurement scorecard, you have to be able to measure.
Yeah, it has to.
And so that you can't measure it clearly, then perhaps you need to rewrite it.
Yeah, you have to be able to measure it and be able to measure it in a reasonable way, because there are some things that can be measured, but that to measure them would just be too cumbersome. Yep, but I will think about your question, because I know safety is a huge issue. So just thinking about the third one, so, because that second one's also about, well, sorry, we zoom in, out. That one covers the same points. So looking at the second one covers a lot of the same points, it's very similar. So we'll look at the third one. So if you have a sample technician, it's about thinking about smart indicators. So an indicator that doesn't work is something like, or a point that doesn't work is collecting wastewater samples. You know, that one's not specific, that's not measurable, it's not time-bound, it's not connected to the goals of the company, but something like percentage of samples collected correctly by the date and time planned in the water sampling plan. So that's much more specific and much more measurable. And if you have a target assigned to that, so you say 90% of our samples, if you want to meet expectations, 90% of our samples need to hit, your target is 90%, you know, that very clearly tells to them, you know, what, not just that you're doing something, but like how do you measure it? And when you sit down, you can say like, what was the percentage of the samples that were collected, right? All right? And I think all of this kind of taking a step back, when you're thinking about performance measures and making the transition from the 10-point plan to the scorecard, one of the big things is thinking about, and I'm going to get a little more conceptual with you guys, but thinking about indicators, thinking about things that are measurable, thinking about things that are focused on helping the corporation improve. And there's three, when you look at how an activity, there's kind of like three ways that you can look at it. One is more on an activity basis, and that's just like, what do you do? So something like assisting with the repair of leaks. That's a what do you do type activity. That's what is a description of an activity, versus something that's an accomplishment, which focuses more on kind of how well that's done, either in a quality way, looking at quality, or looking in timeliness. And that would be something where you're not talking about the activity and what's done, but how do you bring it into something smart? How do you make it measurable? And something like completing work orders within 6 working days. That's much more measurable. And then the other big thing when you think about how what people do contributes to the corporation's performance is the outcome, which is, like activities, what are they doing? Kind of accomplishments are like, how are they doing it? And outcome is, what is the big picture result? And that person assisting with leak repair and completing work orders, that ultimately would feed into like, what is for this person, non-revenue water reduction at the corporation. So that's important, just thinking about that theoretically. I'm gonna tie that now to indicators, because right now, one of the things we see is, in addition to not being smart, in addition to not hitting that criteria about being appropriate for the level of the authority for employees, a lot of indicators are focusing more on activity, it's like what people are doing rather than how well people are doing it, and ultimately kind of what result that has with the corporation, for the corporation. I think we have to make this a little more intuitive. This is one piece of feedback I've gotten. So when you think about activities, accomplishments, and outcomes, that kind of translates into performance measures, where you want to measure kind of outcomes. So the outcome-based the outcome-based performance measures measure outcome. That's something, those are gonna be things like KPIs, and those are things that are gonna be on the scorecards of, there's going to be more of them on the scorecards of people who are more senior. So you can hold a division head responsible for things like the level of NRW or the collection efficiency. Like you can ask them to really achieve certain targets, versus, on the opposite extreme, you can't ask a laborer, you can't ask a serviceman to be responsible. And then these are just kind of more specific descriptions. So outcome is really focused on the results, the end results, kind of like KPI indicators, either at the division level, department level, corporation level. And you'll see a lot of that weighted for people who are heads of things, divisions, departments. Process-based or accomplishment-based, that measures how well things are done, not the activity, not what you do, but how well you do it. And that's where you're gonna, with these in particular, that's where you have to try to hit that SMART criteria. And then the third one is personal development. So assessing if the employee has the knowledge and has the skills. I think one thing that we're looking at right now is, when we incorporated the behavioral scorecard, the behavioral form, it captures some of that. So we're thinking about how to reconcile that, because there is some overlap. But one of the big things when you're looking at how well an employee is doing is, do they have the skills? Are they growing? So this is the type of indicator that would look at that. Yes, I think that's it. Now we have time. Yep.
Traci, I know one question comes up, and I know you addressed in your working group. When you have a performance measure and someone, if it's changing, say, 100 light bulbs, and someone changes 100 light bulbs, is that a 3 or a 5? Meaning that if that's the target, is that meeting expectations or is that?
I think if you listen to the words answer your question. Like if your target is 100 and you hit 100, that meets expectations. Now there is something that needs to be worked out, which is how do those overall rankings that employees receive tie to increments or tie to some sort of performance pay. Because I know the scale now, your scales are different between unions and your scales are different now with the new non-management union industrial agreement. But if you think about the language, the nice thing about it is it's not a 3. It's a meet expectations. It's a meet expectations.
Okay, and so agreeing to that, then was there any discussion as to how do you then get to the steps above it in terms of what are the steps to get to 4 or what are the steps to get to 5?
Change up.
So, and yes. Does anyone have any? And this is something like this is.
I done the debate we had recently where there was a time when you achieved the target, according to a scoring now on 10.9 more or less, that's 100% the achieved target. If someone, adjusted that to if you achieve the target, you're meeting the expectation. So I know the question arises from time to time, but now you're meeting the expectation by achieving the target at 100% level. What is the criteria for going above that? How do we do the steps above it?
Yeah, I think
Unfairly, of course.
2 things are, one is, in the working group, one of the things came up is there are some times where it will not be, and this is an issue, it will not be possible to exceed to go above meet expectations because say it's something about like water samples meeting the WHO standard. Like if your target is 100% because you want to get people safe potable drinking water, like you can't exceed expectations. So that was a limitation that came up, but you're asking a really good question on how do you differentiate, where do you hit those 2 other thresholds, right? Because meet expectations is obvious. Don't meet expectations, obvious. Exceed expectations is obvious, but where do you start edging into excellent? Where do you start edging into unacceptable?
I have a question. Tracy, sorry. You also meet with the working groups. Okay, is this something that could be considered? How do you handle employees agricultural employees who come across a lot of things in the field and they're very proactive. They need a legal connection, they report it. If they think that somebody's abusing the corporation, they follow up. And this is outside of the normal activities. So how do we reward an employee like that who's looking out for the interests of the corporation? Sometimes they go to other departments. So is this something that we consider?
Right now you guys don't have, so I think just sort of ending with Robert's question, we need to think really clearly and have a proper kind of criteria for when you hit those other thresholds. It needs to be something written so that it can be applied fairly.
And I like the point you made because we have that even with some of our 10-point plans now that there's certain measures that you cannot go above exceeding expectations because the standard is, because of what it is, you cannot get in your case, a 4 or 5, and then how does that impact that employee?
Okay. I think these are issues that, okay.
I think to answer your question, I think how we're viewing the behavior evaluation form is going to handle a lot of that. If an employee is going above and beyond, and what I heard from you is that that employee takes a lot of initiative, and that would be captured in the behavior evaluation form. And if we treat the behavior evaluation form score as a multiplier, it would have a multiplier effect on the performance, on the scorecard performance score.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to finish with Robert before I got to you, but I think Patricia did a really good job. The behavioral form, the behavior form, gives you that opportunity that you don't have right now. I know she mentioned we have a couple thoughts about how the behavior and the scorecard meet together. There's that multiplier option that the working group kind of brought up. There's also one that we were originally thinking, which is that you take the overall scores from the behavioral form and the scorecard, and they each have a weight. So it was something, when we presented it initially, it was something where between 10 and 20% of the weight of the overall score comes from the behavioral form. When we were talking, one of the things was thinking about increasing that because to be able to really take into account when people do a lot of work in groups, this is one way to capture that. So when we were meeting with the unions and presenting this to the unions, when we said that 10 to 20%, they actually said they were thinking something like a 25% or 30%. So there's a couple different options on the table, but this is something, the behavioral scorecard will be important.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sometimes when some of our employees may be repairing a leak, maybe major leak, maybe minor leak, a customer may write into the corporation to commend the employees on work well done, and maybe they went above and beyond the call of duty. How would that factor into the evaluation? Equally as if someone write into the corporation with something negative about the staff, how would they factor?
Well, it depends, right?
I think that's one where it should probably end up in the behavior form, right? And that's the nice thing is, one of the things that I've heard is this is an issue. Like, we can't capture that. You can have people who do their job pretty well, but just nobody wants to work with them, or you can't rely on them, and you can't capture that right now. And one of the issues with the lack of uniformity between scorecards is sometimes people try to incorporate that into the scorecard because they need it so badly. But for that question in that instance specifically, it should come through in the behavioral form. I mean, I think
Also. It depends what the customer said, right? I think that if the customer said that the employee had a bad attitude throughout the whole thing, he fixed whatever needed to be fixed, but had a bad attitude, or really was there, I'm only here to fix this, I don't want to look at anything else, that would really fit into the behavior. But I think if it was something based on performance, he didn't do it correctly or didn't follow safety protocols, then,
No, it may be a situation where they may have repaired the leak.
They may have repaired the leak, but they may have seen that, let's say it's a single mother and she may have been struggling with something non-relevant to the work, and they may have gone above and beyond their call of duty to assist, and she may just be writing in, just to express her thanks.
Bringing it back in, I just want to emphasize that performance isn't behavior and behavior isn't performance. Behavior may help and assist in carrying out performance, but it's not the same thing. And that's why we separated them and gave the importance we think that behavior deserves, especially thinking about how this is part of a much larger process to turn around the company and turn around the culture of a company. If we value how, for example, in this case, how customers are treated and how customers feel when they interact with W&SC employees, this is going to go a long way in incentivizing employees to, you know, have a smile on their face when they greet their employees. Monty?
Yeah, one thing that did come out of working group as well at this point is the importance of preserving that record, whatever those records are. Because when you get to the point of the evaluation, you want to say certain things. It is very critical through the course of time to make sure if there are letters or comments or what phone calls, those kind of things to managers. An add-on to this is having a system that preserves the evidence essentially, so that when you get into the conversation, you can have something to support the positions that you take, particularly on the behavioral side.
And added to that, this is also important during the quarterly reviews, because you may have gotten a commendation from a customer or from another manager in one quarter, and you know, you may have gotten a negative one in another quarter. So in meeting with the employee on a quarterly basis, which by the way will take him a lot of time, but that helps the process. Because the employee will say, oh man, somebody just put in a complaint against me, I need to know, I need to improve my attitude or my behavioral aspect of the job.
But you see they do complement each other. For example, you could have a staff member who gets praises by customers for his or her behavior or handle. But in action, in reality, that person is on the job. Sometimes their punctuality might not be so well, or they might have a little attitude with the people that they work with. Maybe perfectly fine with a customer, but they're having issues, level behavioral issues with their co-workers. That's also a possibility. So, but you have to balance you have to use some discretion and balance it out.
So let's take the whole, if you look at the whole.
Yeah. I was told that there's some people who get their family members to write the comments. They get their family members to write the corporation. They say, yeah, Biggie man, he's the most excellent so and so. And sometimes there are customers, right, who berate an employee simply because the customer's in a bad mood. We face that a lot. Face that a lot. So as the manager, you still have to, you have to notice, you have to be able to navigate yourself through situations like that.
Yeah. So one of the big things that I'm hearing is that for you guys, the questions you're asking is how do we capture things beyond just straight performance 10-point plan, and it sounds like the behavior form is going to be huge.
Very important.
Okay.
Traci, again, I echo the need for us to look at situations where managers they have to do so much evaluations, thinking about the reviews, thinking about the annuals. There needs to be some assistance for those managers, in particular in the Family Islands, who would be seen with what may appear to be an unfair volume as compared to managers elsewhere. And so whatever can be done to assist those managers, we need to look at that. I had proposed and suggested, as opposed to a quarterly review, perhaps, a review every, let's say three reviews per year. That may help to reduce the volume. If you want this program to be effective and not, and if it's too much reviews to be done, it may not be as effective as we think it would be.
So I really hear that there are some managers that are going to need a lot of support because they are ultimately responsible for quite a few reviews. And we have to really seriously look at how do we support them, and then also how do we formalize that support in a fair way so it's done uniformly and is uniformly. The one thing that I would caution against is saying, is cutting down how often you check in with your staff and more thinking about what does that review look like and how do we make it less cumbersome. Because I know when you guys rolled out the 10-point plan system, it was originally proposed with quarterly check-ins, and then that kind of got eaten back to semestral check-ins, and now it's just an annual review. And if you think about it as people who are reviewed with managers, and from, you know, can you imagine what it'd be like if you heard from your boss once a year about how you were doing? In terms of morale, in terms of being able to know what to work on. So it's a question of how do we make these reviews possible? How do we get those managers those support? Because they do exist and it will be an issue. You like to look that in the face, but if you're thinking about changing culture, if you're thinking about employee motivation, the answer might not be to pull back in terms of interactions with them and giving them feedback.
And whatever we do, Tracy, it will have to be, you know, that's my mantra for the past 4 days. Consistently, across the board. So it can't be one thing for family islands and one thing for the projects. If we decide to go 4, we stay with 4. If everybody all 3, we stay with 3. Because, you know, that's my thing.
Yeah, I think more, even at a higher level, because there might be differences. I mean, logistically, Family Islands, New Providence, how much interaction you have with your staff. You know, but regardless if we're making these decisions, they need to be documented and they need to be guided by a policy and a procedure. You know, if it's something where as a corporation, they say, you also have, we're making this decision and the union agrees with, the union is on board with this decision, you know, that's something that it needs to be documented, it needs to be a conscious choice.
Based on my experience, I think the staff member would prefer to see the evaluations more often than less.
Yeah, because it's something, absolutely, because you think about, when we were doing the mock reviews, one of the things is, God, this is a lot of papers, and this is a lot of work. But if you think about it as an investment, it really changes how much work it is. Because if you have someone who is not interested, who's not engaged, that you want to talk about a lot of work. Sitting down for an hour or 2 to talk about their performance, to talk about their growth, versus working with someone who's not checked in at all. Like, that is a lot of work. Like, so it's something, even with the quarterly reviews, that investment, you have to think of it as an investment. And also, as managers, your job isn't just getting things done. Your job is helping your teams grow, and the way that you get things done is through your team.
Yeah, I just want to add on to something that Mr. Middleton said. I think it's very important that we see how we involve, because we like to say management and non-management, but the reality is that top tier, the AAA category, are really managers in training. And so it might be where there's joint evaluation with them and we involve them somewhat in the process, because from the employee standpoint, it's obviously going to be a challenge, and will always be, where someone who's not with you every day is evaluating. Maybe it might be both, sit with the employee and evaluate, or the manager sits with them first and then they both then jointly evaluate. But some process and the discussion will have to have had with the management union, because that top tier of category, they're just management and training, and this should be a part of their process and how we involve them. And they are paid, I mean, throughout our industry, they are being paid at a fairly, it's not that there's a big gap between levels of compensation between AAA and then management. It's some places almost overlaps. All right, so it's not as if it's a big difference between their level of compensation. And so as part of their transition into management, some mechanism needs to be involved in.
Okay, so we really need to look at, that's another key point, the weighting, the behavioral form, the involvement of non-managers who have responsibility for team in the review process, formalizing that, making sure that these things are applied fairly, thinking about managers who have big teams that they currently review, and how to make this doable. All right, is there any other questions or comments before I recap a bit? So I think when you look at what we're proposing, right, it's gonna be a change. These changes really respond to the feedback that we heard. Because right now what we heard is there's a real problem with the 10-point plan system. It means for managers you can't measure important things, and like safety, you can't measure important things like attitude. It also means for employees there's a disconnect between what their reviews, because when they hear that they're an 85 versus an 87, it just isn't a good way to facilitate communication, and that reviews are really a conversation about numbers, about 1 or 2 points sometimes, instead of about the employee's growth. So thinking about revisiting this process, especially in light of trying to change what the corporation is doing, is absolutely key in order to be able to engage employees and to make them feel valued, and to make this into a place that they're 100% proud of working at. So I think with that said, I'll hand the mic over. And again, there's a survey coming, so I know we're gonna chat, but there's a survey coming just where we're gonna ask you to provide specific feedback, specific anonymous feedback, so we can really be able to revisit this program and make changes that address issues that you guys see.
Thanks, Traci. I want to thank Traci, Patricia, and Morgan for the presentation this morning. I think it was very informative for all, and it's constantly evolving. Of course, it's not written in stone, as I said earlier. The idea is to get feedback so that we can finalize and negotiate and get all of this done. One of the other things I wanted to point out is that during this year, as I said, it's a process. So during this year, what we're looking at doing is to try to roll out new jobs